Hello my beautiful friends, and welcome back to our channel and today's video, which is for anyone who is suffering right now. In particular, this video is for those of you who are suffering and feel like you shouldn't be, or tell yourself that you shouldn't be. People who are suffering and feel like they don't have a valid reason, or their reason isn't good enough to be able to justify their suffering. Now this can come into our minds, this judgment about our own suffering can come in from many different reasons. I had an example even just this morning where I was up till 4 AM taking care of my dog last night. He had a severe allergic reaction. He had a lot of swelling all around his mouth, including around his throat. And I stayed up all night monitoring him, worried about the medication, worried about any developments in the allergy. And anyway, I ended up staying up straight until 4 AM and slept in till about 7:30. Now I since made the comment today that I was tired because I only had 3.5 hours sleep. The act of me saying that out loud to another person was really me validating my own experience, acknowledging that I was tired because this happened and I thought that was reasonable. And also just feeling a bit sad for myself that I happened to be feeling tired in that moment. Now, in a typical medical fashion, we swoop in with our medical minds that are competitive, and therefore we compare a lot, and we've all suffered a lot as well. And I had a medical person say to me something like, well, I did that for years, or imagine how I felt. I had it way worse, and I can't even remember the exact words they said, but they brought up this comparison. And although I'm sure it wasn't malicious, in my mind, this invalidated, for a moment, my own suffering. Now, because of all the coaching that I've done, I don't get into these suffering Olympics type games. Initially, I did notice that I felt invalidated, and like this other person didn't think that my circumstances warranted my suffering, and that maybe I shouldn't be suffering or feeling sorrow or sad for myself, or like I wish things would be different right now. And I'm not even sure if I was really feeling sympathy for myself or sad for myself. I think I was more feeling compassionate for myself at the time, which is again, thanks to the coaching that I've done and all the amazing coaching that I've been able to receive. And still, my instant reaction was to feel invalidated. Now, if you've been around for long enough and you're starting to get a grip on what coaching is and the coaching tools, you will be picking out already what's going on here. So it's not that this other person caused me to feel invalidated in my experience. But what happened here was when they brought up this idea, they didn't even say explicitly, but it presented this idea in my mind that perhaps my suffering wasn't valid. My mind agreed with that for a moment, and that's why I felt invalidated, because in my mind, I agreed with their apparent opinion. And this is what I really want to narrow in on today for you guys. If you are feeling invalidated in your suffering, this is going to be a cue for you to look into your thoughts about your own suffering. If you are suffering right now for whatever reason, and you have thoughts like, well, they won't understand, people won't understand, I feel alone, I feel like I don't have anyone I can talk to, I should be over it, I shouldn't be suffering, I shouldn't care, I should do better, or other people have it worse, this comparison game. All of these are going to be clues that you in yourself don't think that your suffering is valid. If as you're talking to somebody about your suffering and you're noticing that in your body you're feeling embarrassed, silly, guilty, or having thoughts like you're whining or you're overreacting, you're wasting their time. This is you judging yourself and having the emotional consequences of that as you're speaking and hearing yourself talk to somebody else. Or you notice as you're talking to somebody else, you're actually editing yourself. You're editing your story, leaving out details or downplaying the suffering that you're actually experiencing as you talk and share with them. All of these are clues that you might be invalidating your own suffering. Now in the next section, I want to talk about why invalidating your suffering is a problem, why it's not helping you, why it's actually hindering you. And finally, I want to talk about who you should talk to about your suffering. Now, when it comes to why you should stop invalidating your suffering, why you should validate your own suffering. Firstly, because denying your suffering and certainly resisting your suffering doesn't make it go away. If your strategy to get over your suffering, move through your suffering, or to not have this suffering anymore is to deny or resist it, then all of your efforts that go into pushing those thoughts away and the emotions away, or resisting pushing those thoughts and emotions down, is going to be wasted and amplified. There has been some form of injury or threat to your mind or body, and it would be a complete malfunction of our mind and body to just let that slide. If that idea in our mind that there has been some harm or that there is some threat of harm is in our mind and body, it is expected, is it not, for our mind and body to keep crying out until we acknowledge that problem. Imagine there was a small child who was in danger or saw that something was going wrong. As much as you tell them to just be quiet, they're not going to. If they perceive a threat, they're going to keep nagging you, and rightly so. I need you to know that this is how our adult human minds work as well, and nothing's going wrong here. We just haven't done that secondary assessment yet to say, hey, is this alarm bell that's going off a false alarm? Or is this a genuine harm that's happened, a genuine threat that will potentially happen that I need to attend to? Now, secondly, not only does it not help make the suffering go away when we deny or resist it, but it amplifies the problem. You're in a situation where you perceive a threat and you're suffering, or you perceive a harm and you're suffering with that. And now, on top of that, with your resistance or denial, you're saying, I shouldn't be feeling this. I don't want to feel this right now. You should get over it. It's not that bad. You're just being soft. These kinds of judgments in themselves play out in a cognitive program as well. So you've got this one cognitive program over here that creates the initial suffering, whatever that may be. And then with your judgment that goes in your thought line, you then create an emotion that's probably going to be something like guilt or shame or embarrassment. So now we've got the original suffering, and then we've got this other suffering on top of that because of your judgment. And what's worse, those emotions that are unpleasant for us, they often turn into behaviors that are undesired as well. And those behaviors in themselves can create more suffering. So when you play this out in a cognitive program, the judgment of your suffering, you'll notice that this amplifies your suffering. If you're familiar with the concepts in Buddhism, this is similar to talking about the second arrow. The first arrow was the suffering. The second arrow was the judgment of the suffering. That creates more distress and suffering. Now, finally, I just want to close with talking about this idea that we should share our suffering with other people, that we should seek out compassion and comfort and sympathy, or just a shared experience with other people in our suffering. And I completely agree. That is the ideal situation. If we can seek out that human connection this time, and we can receive really supportive, compassionate connection during this suffering, somebody who can hold that space for you. Now, what stops us from reaching out in these times of suffering to ask for connection with other people is in itself our own invalidation of our suffering. If you think that your suffering is not valid, and then you think, I should go and take this to somebody else, I should share this with somebody else, I want to get this off my chest, or they'll help me feel better, they'll support me, something like that. But then you think to yourself, this suffering isn't valid. Or sneakily, they'll think this suffering isn't valid. They'll think I'm making a big deal out of it. They think I'm overreacting. They'll think that I'm being soft. Whatever the version of that thought is. Those thoughts about your suffering being invalid are going to prevent you from reaching out to another person. The thought is, my suffering is invalid. With some cousin of that, they won't understand because it's not justified, whatever the thought is. That emotion will probably be something like shame. And that shame will probably make you hide and not reach out to the other person, right? So that invalidation is preventing you from getting that connection. That would be very useful in most cases. But here's the thing. Sometimes those thoughts, the idea that they will judge us, or the idea that they won't hear us, that they won't hold that space for us to just hear us process and really experience and reflect on this suffering. Say that we're not asking for help. In most cases, we're not actually asking for the help, but we're just asking for their comfort or their witnessing. These thoughts that either they will judge us or they won't hold that space for us and they'll try and fix us, sometimes those thoughts will be true. Sometimes we'll be right when we make those guesses, when we mind read about other people and how they will treat us when we bring them our suffering. And what I don't want is for that to cause more suffering on top of your suffering. I don't want that to be the thing that breaks you. Reaching out for support and then not getting it. Because people will be people. People are flawed. Not everybody is able to hold that non-judgmental space. And people will sometimes have their automatic, involuntary, non-malicious, but just untamed, unskilled minds judge your suffering or try and fix your suffering, misinterpret what you're asking for. If you have already validated your suffering, if you know, regardless of whatever the reasoning, whatever the circumstances, I am a human and I suffer and my suffering is valid, even if it's more or less than another person, because I know there's no such thing as like more or less suffering, then you can safely go to that person and reach out for that support. And if or when they judge you or they don't hold that space for you, you're okay, because you don't make it mean that your suffering isn't valid. You've already validated it in yourself. And the way to do that is to recognize that humans suffer. We all suffer. Our emotional distress, our activated physiology in itself is suffering, regardless of the circumstances or the thoughts that are driving that suffering. Your emotional distress is a suffering human experience in a lot of cases. Or pain in itself, I say, is an inevitable part of life. And it often comes with suffering because of the nature of our mind. So my beautiful friends, all of this to say, the most important thing when you're suffering is for us to learn, and this takes time, for us to learn to validate our own suffering. And that helps us to be able to reach out for other people and share in our suffering. Seek that human connection and comfort and soothing or sense of common humanity that we crave when we're suffering. And as with most things we talk about in coaching and we empower you with in coaching, it starts with us. Yes, I think as people, as social creatures, we do need other people. But the most empowered place for us to be is to be able to hold ourselves and have these experiences with other people be enhancing, not the thing that we need to fill a gap or a deficit. We don't need them to validate our suffering, to feel valid in our suffering. We validate our suffering first and then we seek them out. And it's not so black and white, these things can happen in parallel. My beautiful friends, if you know that this is something that you find challenging and you know that it would enhance your life, change your life, if you were able to learn these skills and jump on a no cost, no obligation call with me, this is our time for you to tell me, hey, this is where I'm at, this is where I want to be. And it gives me an opportunity to see what's going on and prescribe a coaching solution to you to see if coaching is the right thing for you right now. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you take the best care of yourselves this week and I'll see you in my next one.